This is the reason Andy Griffith was buried less than 5 hours after he died, and why his own family kept it that quiet. Griffith passed away on July 3, 2012, at his home on Roanoke Island, North Carolina, and by around 11:30 that same morning he was already in the ground. No public funeral happened, no church service took place, no line of mourners filed past a casket. Just a handful of trusted friends, a grounded fleet of helicopters, and a plan Andy Griffith had put in place long before that day ever came. Today we're walking through exactly what happened, why it happened so fast, and what it tells us about the man behind Sheriff Andy Taylor and Ben Matlock. Understanding the final hours means first understanding who this man actually was, because the burial only makes sense once you know how he lived. Mount Airy, North Carolina gave the world Andy Samuel Griffith on June 1, 1926, the only child of a carpenter named Carl Lee Griffith and his wife Geneva. Money was tight when Andy came along, tight enough that as a baby he slept in dresser drawers for months because there wasn't a crib to put him in. Not until he turned about 3 did his father manage to buy the family an actual home, and even then it sat on what people considered the blue-collar side of town. That upbringing explains a lot about why Andy Griffith became so beloved later on. The fictional Mayberry that millions of Americans tuned into every week was modeled directly on Mount Airy, right down to Mount Pilot, a nod to the real Pilot Mountain nearby. Griffith never really left home in spirit. He just carried it with him wherever the career took him. Acting wasn't the original plan. Opera singing came first as a childhood dream, and after that, Griffith actually considered the ministry, enrolling at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1944 as a pre-divinity student. Drama and musical theater pulled him in a different direction before long, and he graduated from Chapel Hill in 1949 with a degree in music instead. Teaching came next, not acting. Griffith spent a few years as a music and English teacher at Goldsboro High School in North Carolina, and it's strange to think about now, picturing the future Sheriff Andy Taylor standing in front of a classroom instead of a camera. What changed everything was a record. In November of 1953, Griffith released a comedic monologue called What It Was Football, recorded in Chapel Hill, and that single piece of storytelling cracked open the door to a much bigger career. From there, things moved fast. Broadway came calling in 1955 when Griffith made his debut in No Time for Sergeants playing an Air Force draftee, a performance strong enough to earn him a Tony nomination. A second nomination followed a few years later for the musical Destry Rides Again in 1959. Film work happened in between those two Broadway runs. Griffith made his movie debut in 1957's A Face in the Crowd opposite Patricia Neal, then reprised his No Time for Sergeants role for the 1958 film version. By the end of the decade, he'd already proven himself on stage and on-screen both, but nothing compared to what came next. 1960 changed everything. The Andy Griffith Show premiered on CBS that year and turned Andy Griffith into a household name almost overnight. He played Sheriff Andy Taylor, a widower raising his young son Opie, played by Ron Howard, in the fictional small town of Mayberry. The cast around him became just as iconic, with Don Knotts as bumbling Deputy Barney Fife, Frances Bavier as Aunt Bee, Jim Neighbors as Gomer, and George Lindsay as Goober. 8 seasons, 1960 to 1968, 249 episodes. That's what the show ultimately produced. Here's a detail that tends to surprise people. Griffith worked as an uncredited writer on the show's scripts for its entire run, shaping the material week after week without his name ever showing up in the credits. And despite carrying the show to massive success, Andy Griffith himself never won an Emmy for playing Andy Taylor. Don Knotts won one. Frances Bavier won one. The man the whole show was built around never took one home. 1968 is when Griffith walked away, right at the height of the show's popularity. 4 years later, in 1972, he launched his own production company, Andy Griffith Enterprises, and the stretch that followed wasn't always smooth. Pilots got made and quietly canceled. Projects came and went without much notice. 1986 brought the comeback. Griffith landed the role of Ben Matlock, a folksy but sharp Southern defense attorney in the legal drama Matlock, which ran for 9 seasons through 1995 and introduced him to an entirely new generation who'd never even seen Mayberry. He kept circling back to that earlier world too. The 1986 reunion TV movie Return to Mayberry turned out to be the highest-rated program of that entire year, and 2 more reunion specials followed, one in 1993. Work never really stopped, even as the roles got smaller. Griffith appeared in 2001's Daddy and Them, 2007's Waitress, and what became his final film role, 2009's Play the Game. He even turned up on a 2001 episode of Dawson's Creek, a strange but true footnote in the career of a man who started out playing a small-town sheriff. Then in 2005, President George W. Bush awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of the highest civilian honors the country hands out, recognition of just how deep this one actor had woven himself into American life. Behind all that warmth on screen, Griffith spent a good chunk of his life fighting serious health problems most of the public never fully saw play out. The early 1980s brought a diagnosis of Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that can trigger sudden paralysis, serious enough that Griffith needed real recovery time before returning to full-time acting. He got through it, and not long after, Ben Matlock came along. Nearly 2 decades later in 2000, a heart attack sent him into quadruple heart bypass surgery, about as major a procedure as they come. A fall in 2007 led to hip surgery, so by 2012, at 86 years old, Griffith had already survived a serious neurological illness, major heart surgery, and orthopedic surgery. His body had absorbed a lot by then. His death certificate tells the last chapter with unusual precision. A heart attack struck roughly 24 hours before he actually died, according to the certificate signed by Dr. Johnny Farrow of Manteo, North Carolina, which also listed coronary artery disease, hypertension, and hyperlipidemia as contributing conditions. Put plainly, his heart gave out after years of strain finally caught up with it. At approximately 7 a.m. on July 3, 2012, Andy Griffith died at his home on Roanoke Island in Manteo, North Carolina. Cindy Griffith, his wife of nearly 3 decades, was right there at his bedside when he passed, and Dare County Sheriff J.D. Doty confirmed the death publicly that same day. Here's where the story takes the turn most people don't know about. Within hours of Griffith's death, before most of the country had even heard the news, his family and a small circle of local friends were already carrying out specific, deliberate final wishes. By roughly 11:30 that morning, Griffith had been buried in the Griffith family cemetery on his own property on Roanoke Island, which meant less than 5 hours passed between the moment he died and the moment he went into the ground. A funeral spokesperson told CNN at the time that the arrangements had, in his words, been planned for some time, and that it reflected, quote, the wish of his family. This wasn't a rushed decision made in the fog of grief. It was a plan already sitting in place, waiting for the day it would be needed. What makes it remarkable is just how far that planning went. The Dare County Sheriff's Office actually grounded local helicopters that day specifically to keep camera crews from flying over the Griffith estate. Local law enforcement took active steps, on the very day this legendary actor died, to physically block the media from capturing images of his burial from above. Speed came at a cost, though. Because everything moved so quickly, only a small number of Griffith's local friends made it in time, and his own daughter Dixie couldn't get there at all. She was traveling with her children, and there simply wasn't enough time to arrange the trip. Looking back on it later, she said she understood that his wishes had to come first, even though it meant missing the chance to be there in person. So why would a man this beloved skip the public funeral, skip the crowds of mourners, and choose to be buried within hours instead? Biographer Daniel DeVise, who wrote about Griffith's life and his friendship with Don Knotts in a 2015 book, explained that Griffith had made his wishes known well before he died. Helicopters circling his home were out, press coverage was out. Crowds swarming for a glimpse of his casket were out. What he wanted was something small, private, and dignified, time to move fast enough that the media simply couldn't organize a response. DeVisey put it directly, writing that the plan was to bury Griffith before, in his words, the paparazzi could storm Roanoke Island to capture his remains on film. And the people around Griffith carried it out to the letter. The sheriff's department grounded the helicopters, a tight circle of local friends showed up, and by late morning the whole thing was already finished. Dixie spoke about this herself. Her father didn't want a funeral, she said. He didn't want a circus. He didn't want a media frenzy. And even though missing his burial meant she never got that final in-person goodbye, she said she understood and respected exactly what he wanted. There's a quieter, more personal detail worth including here too. Dixie told DeVisey about one last phone call with her father before he died, describing it as a moment where he seemed to be passing wisdom on to her to carry forward. Something about the tone of that conversation told her it would be their last, so they said the only thing left to say. They told each other they loved one another, and that was it. Put it all together and the fast burial stops looking like a mystery and starts looking like exactly what it was, an act of privacy. Andy Griffith had spent decades in the public eye, inviting the country into his fictional living room every week for 8 years as Sheriff Andy Taylor, then for 9 more as Ben Matlock. When it came time for his own final moment, though, he wanted something the public rarely got from him at all, which was total privacy. Private as the burial was, the public reaction to Griffith's death was anything but quiet. Word spread fast on July 3rd, and tributes poured in from the highest levels of government down to the people who'd worked beside him for decades. President Barack Obama released an official statement through the White House that same day. "Michelle and I were saddened to hear about the passing of Andy Griffith this morning," he said. A performer of extraordinary talent, Andy was beloved by generations of fans and revered by entertainers who followed in his footsteps. He brought us characters from Sheriff Andy Taylor to Ben Matlock, and in the process warmed the hearts of Americans everywhere. Our thoughts and prayers are with Andy's family. North Carolina Governor Beverly Perdue captured just how tightly Griffith was bound to his home state. "North Carolina has lost its favorite son," she said, adding that throughout his career he represented everything good about North Carolina, a small-town boy and UNC graduate who took the qualities he grew up with and turned them into a career few could match. Her statement closed with something almost wistful. "In an increasingly complicated world, we all yearn for the days of Mayberry. We all will miss Andy, and I will dearly miss my friend." Ron Howard, who'd played Opie as a child and stayed close with Griffith for decades afterward, posted his own tribute on Twitter, crediting Griffith's, quote, "pursuit of excellence and the joy he took in creating, with having served generations and shaped my life." Howard expanded on those thoughts later in a column for the Los Angeles Times, writing that Griffith proved hour by hour, episode by episode, that creativity and neurotic angst were in fact not inexorably linked. According to Howard, Griffith led by example, and the cast and crew learned they could play practical jokes on each other, laugh until they cried, and still shoot 12 pages of script a day while putting out a #1 rated show. Jim Nabors, who'd played Gomer on the original series, sent his own condolences. "I was saddened this morning to learn of the passing of my good friend Andy Griffith," he said. "He was a legend. My thoughts and prayers are with Andy's family." Barbara Eden, who appeared on The Andy Griffith Show before going on to star in I Dream of Jeannie, described what it was like working across from him, and her words speak to just how natural he was as a performer. His talent, she said, created an aura of reality on the set, and he was so honest and so centered, sometimes you didn't know if you were having a discussion with him or if you were doing the lines. Cindy Griffith released her own statement that day as well. "Andy was a person of incredibly strong Christian faith and was prepared for the day he would be called home to his Lord," she said. "He is the love of my life, my constant companion, my partner, and my best friend. I cannot imagine life without Andy, but I take comfort and strength in God's grace and in the knowledge that Andy is at peace and with God." Step back and look at the whole picture, and Andy Griffith's burial stops being a mystery, even though it's often framed that way. It's really the story of a man who spent most of his adult life in front of cameras, who let the country into his fictional living room every week for 8 years as Sheriff Andy Taylor and then for 9 more as Ben Matlock, choosing at the very end to keep something entirely for himself. He planned it that way, and not in a panic either, not as some last-minute call by a grieving family scrambling for answers. It was a plan that had, in the words of that funeral spokesperson, been planned for some time. The Dare County Sheriff's Office helped carry it out by grounding the helicopters. A small circle of trusted local friends stood as the only witnesses. His own daughter, who loved him deeply and had spoken to him just before he died, had to accept that she wouldn't be there in person because that's what her father wanted. 7 a.m. on July 3, 2012, at his home on Roanoke Island, with his wife Cindy beside him, that's when Andy Griffith died. Less than 5 hours later, by around 11:30 that same morning, he'd already been laid to rest in the family cemetery on his own property. Fast, quiet, and exactly what he wanted, all three at once. That's the full story behind why Andy Griffith was buried just hours after he died. Not a scandal and not some secret hidden away for years, but the final act of a very private plan from a very public man. Andy Griffith spent decades bringing Mayberry, and later a sharp Southern courtroom, into homes across America. In the end, he asked for one thing, that his last moments belong only to the people who knew him best, far away from the cameras that had followed him for most of his life.